The desert highway stretched endlessly under the scorching Nevada sun, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through barren wasteland where few dared to venture. It was here, on this desolate stretch of Route 375, that Jack Morrison's 18-wheeler was discovered on a cold October morning in 2019, its engine still warm, doors wide open, and its driver nowhere to be found. The cargo remained untouched in the trailer, sealed containers marked with radiation symbols and government classifications that would make most people's blood run cold. But Jack Morrison was gone, vanished into the desert air as if he had never existed at all. Jack had been driving trucks for over 25 years, navigating the loneliest roads in America with the skill and confidence of a man who had seen it all. His weathered hands knew every mile of interstate from California to Maine, and his keen eyes had witnessed sunrises and storms that most people only dream about. He was a man of few words but deep loyalty, especially to his wife Sarah, who waited for him in their modest home in Bakersfield every time he embarked on another cross-country journey. Their marriage had weathered the storms of a trucker's life, the long absences and uncertain schedules, bound together by a love that had grown stronger over 2 decades. The job that would change everything came through Morrison Freight Solutions on a Tuesday morning in early October. Jack's dispatcher, Tommy Rodriguez, had called with an unusual request. The Department of Energy needed a specialized transport for classified materials from a facility outside Las Vegas to a research installation in Colorado. The pay was exceptional, nearly 3 times his usual rate, but the conditions were strict. No stops except for fuel, no communication except in emergencies, and absolute discretion about the cargo's nature. Jack had transported sensitive materials before, including medical isotopes and industrial chemicals, so the requirements didn't seem unusual. Sarah remembered him kissing her goodbye that morning, his stubble rough against her cheek, promising to call when he reached the halfway point, as he always did. The first sign that something was wrong came 18 hours into the journey. Sarah's phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. with an incoming call from Jack's number. His voice, when she answered, was strained and barely above a whisper. The connection crackled with static, making his words difficult to understand, but the fear in his tone was unmistakable. He spoke rapidly, almost frantically, about lights in his mirrors that weren't from other vehicles, about a humming sound that seemed to come from the trailer itself. Most disturbing of all, he mentioned that the radiation detector he carried as standard equipment was clicking faster than it should, even through the supposed shielding of the cargo containers. Before you continue following this mystery, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Vanished Files for more incredible true stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Now let's dive deeper into what happened that night. The investigation that followed Jack's disappearance was unlike anything the Nevada State Police had encountered. Federal agents arrived within hours of the truck's discovery, taking control of the scene with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. They cordoned off a 2-mile radius around the abandoned vehicle, citing environmental hazards and national security concerns. Local law enforcement found themselves pushed to the periphery of their own investigation, relegated to directing traffic, while men in radiation suits combed through every inch of the truck and surrounding desert. What the federal team discovered in those first crucial hours remains classified to this day, but leaked documents obtained 5 years later paint a picture of complete bewilderment. Jack's personal belongings were found exactly where they should be, his logbook filled out meticulously up until 2:30 a.m., just 17 minutes before his desperate phone call to Sarah. His coffee was still warm in the cup holder, and his sandwich sat half-eaten on the dashboard, as if he had simply stepped outside for a moment and vanished into the night air. Most puzzling of all was the truck's black box data, which showed the vehicle coming to a complete stop at 2:33 a.m. and remaining stationary until dawn, with no record of the engine being turned off or any doors being opened. The cargo itself presented its own mysteries. The sealed containers, each weighing nearly 2 tons and marked with warnings in multiple languages, were found to be completely intact. Their electromagnetic seals showed no signs of tampering, and radiation readings were within normal parameters for the type of materials being transported. Yet something had clearly gone wrong during that lonely desert night, something that had filled an experienced driver with enough terror to risk breaking protocol and call his wife in the middle of his journey. Sarah Morrison's world collapsed in the weeks that followed. The official investigation yielded nothing beyond the basic facts of Jack's disappearance. Federal agents interviewed her multiple times, their questions always circling back to that final phone call and whether Jack had mentioned anything unusual about his cargo or route. She told them about the lights he had seen, the strange humming sound, and his concern about the radiation detector, but their expressions remained professionally neutral, offering no insight into whether these details held significance. The months turned into years, and Sarah's hope gradually transformed into something harder and more desperate. She hired private investigators, posted on missing persons forums, and drove the desert highways herself, searching for any trace of the man she had loved for 20 years. The federal government's compensation was generous, more money than Jack would have earned in 5 years of driving, but it came with a non-disclosure agreement that prevented her from speaking publicly about the circumstances of his disappearance. She signed it anyway, clinging to the hope that cooperation might somehow bring him home. The first credible sighting of something unusual didn't come until the spring of 2024, nearly 5 years after Jack vanished into the Nevada night. Security cameras at a truck stop in Tonopah, about 60 miles from where Jack's truck was found, captured footage that would reignite interest in the case and raise questions that no one seemed willing to answer. The timestamp read 3:17 a.m. on a clear April morning, when a figure appeared at the edge of the camera's range, moving with an odd, shambling gait toward the brightly lit fuel islands. At first glance, the figure appeared to be a man of average height and build, wearing what looked like the standard uniform of a long-haul trucker. But as the security footage continued, details emerged that defied easy explanation. The figure's movements were unnaturally fluid, almost gliding across the asphalt without the normal rhythm of human locomotion. More disturbing still was the figure's skin, which appeared to have an unusual luminescence under the harsh fluorescent lights, as if lit from within by some internal source. The truck stop's night clerk, a young man named Danny Reeves, who had been working the graveyard shift for 3 years, later described the encounter in terms that bordered on the supernatural. The figure had approached the store's entrance, but stopped just outside the automatic doors, which refused to open despite his proximity. Danny watched through the reinforced glass as the figure raised its head, revealing features that were human, but somehow wrong, as if someone had tried to recreate a face from memory and gotten the proportions slightly off. Most chilling of all was what happened when their eyes met through the glass. Danny later told investigators that he felt a moment of recognition, as if he were looking at someone familiar, though he was certain he had never seen this person before. The figure's mouth moved as if speaking, but no sound penetrated the store's walls. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure turned and walked back into the darkness beyond the camera's reach, disappearing into the desert night, just as completely as Jack Morrison had 5 years earlier. Word of the Tonopah incident spread quickly through the tight-knit community of desert truck stops and highway diners. Other sightings followed, each one adding another piece to a puzzle that seemed to grow more complex with every revelation. A waitress at a diner in Goldfield reported serving coffee to a man who matched the description, noting that he had paid with exact change and spoken in a voice that sounded like it was coming from underwater. A maintenance worker at a rest area claimed to have seen the same figure, examining the posted maps with intense concentration, running its fingers over the highways as if trying to remember something important. But it was the testimony of Maria Santos, a long-haul driver with 30 years of experience, that provided the most disturbing connection to Jack Morrison's disappearance. She had stopped at the same truck stop where Jack was last seen refueling, taking her mandatory rest break in the early hours of an October morning, exactly 5 years after his vanishing. As she sat in her cab completing her logbook, she noticed a figure standing beside the fuel pumps, perfectly motionless despite the cold desert wind. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who loves unsolved mysteries, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because this story gets even more incredible. The figure Maria observed matched the descriptions from other sightings, but she noticed additional details that the security cameras had failed to capture. The man's clothing appeared to be the same style that Jack Morrison had been wearing when he disappeared, down to the specific brand of work boots that Sarah had bought him for their anniversary. More unsettling still was the figure's behavior, which Maria described as purposeful but confused, like someone trying to remember how to perform familiar tasks. She watched for nearly 20 minutes as the figure moved between the fuel pumps, its hands hovering over the controls as if trying to recall the process of refueling a truck. At one point, it approached her own vehicle, and Maria got her clearest look at its face through her windshield. The features were undeniably human, but carried a quality that she struggled to describe, as if the person had been underwater for a very long time and was only now learning to breathe air again. The most significant development came when Maria decided to approach the figure directly. Despite every instinct telling her to remain in her locked cab, her curiosity and concern for a fellow driver overcame her fear. She opened her door and called out, asking if the person needed help. The figure turned toward her with movements that seemed to occur in slow motion. And when it spoke, the voice that emerged was hollow and distant, like an echo from the bottom of a deep well. The words it spoke would haunt Maria for the rest of her life. "Sarah, tell Sarah, the lights took me away, but I'm trying to come home." The name hit Maria like a physical blow because every trucker in the region knew the story of Jack Morrison and his wife Sarah. She had seen the missing person flyers posted at truck stops across the Southwest, had heard the story passed along through CB radio chatter during long, lonely nights on the road. Before Maria could respond or ask any questions, the figure began to walk away, moving with that same unnatural gait toward the dark desert beyond the truck stop's lights. She followed for a short distance, calling out for the person to wait, to explain what had happened, but the figure continued walking until it disappeared completely into the darkness. When Maria returned to her truck, her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely operate her CB radio to report what she had witnessed. The report that Maria filed with both local law enforcement and the federal authorities responsible for Jack's case was met with skepticism and official silence. The agencies that had taken control of the investigation 5 years earlier showed no interest in pursuing this new lead, dismissing Maria's account as the product of suggestion and wishful thinking. But Maria knew what she had seen and heard, and she wasn't the type of person to fabricate stories or seek attention for herself. Her decision to contact Sarah Morrison directly would prove to be the catalyst for everything that followed. Sarah had maintained her silence for 5 years, honoring the non-disclosure agreement and holding on to the hope that cooperation with the authorities might somehow bring Jack home. But Maria's call changed everything, reigniting a fire that had been smoldering beneath the surface of her grief and frustration. The two women met at a diner in Bakersfield, the same place where Jack and Sarah had shared their first date 23 years earlier. Maria recounted every detail of her encounter, describing not just what she had seen, but the feeling of recognition that had washed over her when the figure spoke. Sarah listened in stunned silence, tears streaming down her face as she heard Jack's message delivered by a stranger in a roadside restaurant. But Sarah's reaction wasn't just emotional, it was investigative. She had spent 5 years learning everything she could about her husband's disappearance, cultivating contacts within the trucking community, and developing an understanding of the federal agencies involved in the case. She knew that the cargo Jack had been transporting was connected to a classified research program, and she had her suspicions about what might have happened to him during that final journey. The radiation exposure was the key piece of the puzzle that Sarah had been trying to understand for years. Jack's route had taken him past several military installations and research facilities, including areas known to be associated with nuclear testing and experimental programs. The fact that his radiation detector had been clicking faster than normal suggested that something had gone wrong with the cargo's containment, exposing him to levels of radiation that could have had unpredictable effects on his body and mind. Working together, Sarah and Maria began to map the pattern of sightings across the Nevada desert, creating a timeline that revealed a disturbing progression. The encounters were becoming more frequent, and the figure's behavior more coherent, as if whatever had happened to Jack was slowly reversing or evolving. The implications were both hopeful and terrifying, suggesting that he might be recovering from his ordeal, but also raising questions about what he had become during his 5-year absence. Their investigation led them back to the original scene of Jack's disappearance, the lonely stretch of Route 375 where his truck had been found. Sarah had visited this location dozens of times over the years, but she had never been there at the same time of night when Jack had vanished. This time, she and Maria arrived at 2:30 a.m., parking at the exact spot where the 18-wheeler had been discovered. The desert at night is a place of profound silence and infinite darkness, where the absence of light makes every sound amplified and every shadow suspicious. They sat in Maria's truck, with the engine running and the heater on, scanning the horizon for any sign of movement or unusual lights. For the first hour, they saw nothing but the occasional distant glow of aircraft passing overhead and the faint shimmer of stars in the clear desert sky. Then, at exactly 2:47 a.m., the same time that Jack had made his final phone call 5 years earlier, they saw the lights. They appeared first as a faint glow on the horizon, too steady to be vehicles and too bright to be natural phenomena. The lights moved with purpose across the desert floor, following no road or path that appeared on any map, casting an eerie illumination that seemed to bend and shift like liquid mercury. As they watched in fascination and growing fear, the lights began to converge on their location, approaching with a speed that defied explanation. Sarah gripped Maria's arm, her heart pounding, as she realized they were about to witness something that the federal government had spent 5 years trying to keep secret. The lights weren't just unusual, they were clearly of artificial origin, controlled by an intelligence that understood exactly where to find them. The figure that emerged from the light was unmistakably Jack Morrison, but changed in ways that Sarah struggled to comprehend. His face retained the familiar features she had loved for 20 years, but his skin had a translucent quality that seemed to glow with its own inner light. His movements were fluid and purposeful, but he appeared to be walking through water rather than air, each step creating ripples in the fabric of reality around him. When he reached their truck, Jack placed his palm against the passenger window, and Sarah could see that his hand was warm enough to fog the glass despite the cold desert night. His eyes, when they met hers through the barrier of metal and glass, were the same warm brown she remembered, but they held depths of experience and knowledge that hadn't been there before his disappearance. When he spoke, his voice came not through the air, but directly into their minds, bypassing their ears entirely. The message he delivered would change everything Sarah thought she knew about her husband's fate and the forces responsible for his transformation. The cargo he had been transporting wasn't just radioactive material. It was something far more experimental and dangerous, part of a program designed to push the boundaries of human consciousness and physical reality. The exposure hadn't killed him, as the authorities had feared, but had instead changed him in ways that science was only beginning to understand. Jack explained that he had spent the past 5 years existing in a state between dimensions, learning to navigate realities that most humans couldn't even perceive. The process had been painful and confusing, but he had slowly regained enough control over his altered state to make contact with the physical world. The sightings that had been reported across the desert were his attempts to find his way back to Sarah, to complete the journey home that had been interrupted by forces beyond anyone's control. But his return came with a warning that chilled Sarah to her core. The program that had created his cargo was still active, and other drivers were being recruited for similar transport jobs without understanding the true nature of what they were carrying. Jack's transformation had been accidental, but the researchers responsible for the program were now deliberately seeking to replicate the results, creating more beings like him for purposes that remained unclear. The lights that had brought Jack to them began to fade, and he explained that his time in this reality was limited. The energy required to maintain his physical presence was enormous, and he could only sustain it for brief periods. But he promised Sarah that he would find a way to return permanently to expose the program that had stolen 5 years of their lives together, and to ensure that no other families would suffer the same loss. As Jack began to fade back into the dimensional space he now inhabited, he delivered one final message that would guide Sarah's actions in the months to come. Hidden within the federal facility where his cargo had originated were documents that would expose the full scope of the program and the identities of other drivers who had been recruited for similar missions. Some of these men had never returned from their journeys, their families left to wonder and grieve without ever knowing the truth. The lights disappeared completely, leaving Sarah and Maria alone in the desert darkness with the weight of impossible knowledge and a mission that would put them at odds with forces far more powerful than they had ever imagined. But Sarah no longer felt the crushing despair that had defined her existence for the past 5 years. Jack was alive, changed, but still himself, and he was fighting to come home. Now it was her turn to fight for him, to expose the truth, and to ensure that their love story would have the ending it deserved. The investigation that Sarah and Maria launched in the wake of that desert encounter would uncover a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government and military research, involving experiments that pushed the boundaries of human understanding and challenged everything they thought they knew about the nature of reality itself. But that revelation, and the dangerous journey it would set in motion, is a story that continues to unfold even today, somewhere in the liminal space between the world we know and the dimensions that lie just beyond our perception. If this story has captivated you as much as it has us, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Vanished Files for more incredible mysteries that blur the line between reality and the impossible. The truth about Jack Morrison and the program that transformed him is still being uncovered, and we'll be here to share every shocking revelation as it comes to light.